Well, good morning, all of you, and many thanks for gathering. Obviously, we don't normally today on a Monday, but this is a really important day, and I think that we should recognize a day where we recognize and honor all the men and women who have served and are currently serving. Mark Wawer is a former Taft parent. I think it's proof that he's a true Taftie that the first thing he asked me when I saw him this morning was, how'd we do this weekend? He automatically remembered that it was Hotchkiss weekend. His two sons graduated from Taft, and 2 years ago he gave an absolutely terrific talk. And it was a talk about an odyssey, I think, a journey in which he was traveling in Italy and saw some of the military cemeteries there from World War II, and he became fascinated and maybe even almost obsessed with the story of the Taft men who were buried there. And he wanted to honor them, and he wanted to reach out to their families, and so he did that, and it was an incredible story, and I think it was deeply moving for all of us. He has another similar story, and I think it's important for all of us. I think that on this day, and I don't know whether you have someone in your family, either directly or in your grandparents perhaps, who have served. That's certainly the case in my family. Whether you do or you don't, I think what's critical is that we stop and we remember that there are men and women who are serving right now, and there are men and women who have died over the years to preserve our liberties. And I think this is a day that it's critical for us to do that. When you walk through Lincoln Lobby, you'll be reminded of it, because you'll go by the memorial plaques and you'll see all those men who died during World War II, many of whom were 18 years old and who were seniors and who left the school to go serve. So it's in that spirit and with the sense that there's a great story ahead for us, I want to introduce and please give a warm welcome to Mr. Mark Wawer.
Thank you, Mr. Mack, for those kind words. This is dedicated to Trevor Laughlin, class of 2010, who lived his life with honor. I think continually of those who were truly great, who in their lives fought for life. Born of the sun, they traveled a short while towards the sun and left the vivid air signed with their honor. Poet Stephen Spender. A few years ago, Mr. Mack addressed the incoming class of students. He said, "What separates Taft from other schools was that we hope to create an environment where each of you have the opportunity to grow into who you wish to be. To accomplish that requires a community marked by three things: honor, respect, and kindness. Of these, honor is the most important. Honor is the cornerstone of Taft." Today, Veterans Day, we honor George Coe Browning, class of 42, and Herbert Wildman, Jr., class of 34, who died in the Battle of Iwo Jima. The photograph of the U.S. Marines raising the American flag atop Mount Suribachi on Iwo Jima is the most famous photograph of World War II. It remains an enduring symbol of the American spirit, courage, and sacrifice of the men who fought there. Iwo Jima, which means Sulphur Island, is a volcanic island located 650 miles southeast of Tokyo. Only 5 miles in length and 2.5 miles wide, its strategic importance in World War II were 2 airfields used by the Japanese to launch attack planes against U.S. bombers en route to Japan. An amphibious assault was planned for February 1945. A force of 70,000 Marines were sent to capture the island, defended by 22,000 Japanese troops. The battle was expected to last 5 days. This was no surprise attack. The Japanese army knew this day was coming and spent 2 years building a complex series of tunnels, caves, pillboxes, covered artillery, emplaced tanks, and landmines. Orders were given that each soldier would fight to the death. The first wave of Marines landed on February 19, 1945. Men and equipment became bogged down in the soft volcanic sand. Heavy artillery shells, mortars, and machine gun fire rained down on the Marines. There was no place to hide. The slaughter had begun. War correspondent Robert Sherritt of Time Life magazine would later write, "The first night on Iwo Jima can only be described as a nightmare in hell. About the beach in the morning lay the dead. They had died with the greatest possible violence. Nowhere in the Pacific have I seen such badly mangled bodies. Many were cut squarely in half. Legs and arms lay 50 feet from any body." Iwo Jima would be the bloodiest battle since Gettysburg. In 36 days of battle, 6,821 Americans were killed, over 23,000 wounded. 21,000 Japanese soldiers would be killed. Less than 1,000 would be taken as prisoners. Admiral Nimitz would later remark, "On Iwo Jima, uncommon valor was a common virtue." 27 medals of honor would be awarded at Iwo Jima. Here is one story. 14-year-old Jacqueline Lucas forged his mother's signature to join the Marine Corps. 5'8" and 180 pounds, he passed for a 17-year-old. Following 2 years of training, his rifle company was bound for Iwo Jima. Lucas's real age was discovered, and he was ordered back to base for kitchen duty. Lucas wanted to be with his fellow Marines, so he deserted and stowed away aboard a troop ship. During passage to Iwo Jima, Lucas turned 17 and was allowed to reunite with his unit. On day 2 of the battle, his platoon was involved in a firefight at close range. 2 enemy grenades were tossed into his trench. Lucas yelled to warn the other Marines and immediately fell on the first grenade, pushing it into the soft volcanic sand with the butt end of his rifle. He reached out with his right arm to grab the second grenade and pull it under him. The grenade under his stomach exploded, ripping his body open. Left for dead, he miraculously survived. As the grenade exploded, the volcanic sand filled his chest cavity, preventing him from bleeding to death. He would later undergo 26 operations to remove the shrapnel and repair his wounds. When the 17-year-old was later asked why he fell on the grenades, he replied, "To save my buddies." They lived and laughed and loved and left. James Joyce, Finnegan's Wake. George Coe Browning, class of '42, was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota. In high school, he played football, basketball, tennis, and hockey. His hobbies included swimming, hunting, and playing the piano. In October 1942, he left Princeton to enlist in the Marine Corps. Browning served as a field radio operator assigned to the 4th Marine Division. In February 1944, he was shipped overseas, where he saw combat in 3 separate battles over the next 6 months. The Battle of Roy Namur, the Battle of Saipan, where Browning was wounded and received the Purple Heart, and the Battle of Taipan. In February 1945, the 4th Marine Division headed to Iwo Jima. On the second day of battle, at 11 a.m., under heavy artillery fire, Browning was sent back to retrieve communications gear. He was never seen again. In all likelihood, he was blown up by artillery pounding the beach. His remains were never found. He was 22 years old. Private Browning is memorialized in the American Military Cemetery in Honolulu, Hawaii. Herbert Wildman Jr., class of '34, was born in Stamford, Connecticut. In high school, he participated in football, wrestling, and tennis. After high school, he worked in his family's liquor distribution business, got married, and joined the Marine Corps in 1942 after war broke out. Serving as a second lieutenant on Iwo Jima, he landed on Blue Beach 1 in the first wave of attack, subjected to a murderous barrage of mortars, heavy artillery, and machine gun fire. His platoon suffered severe casualties and became disorganized in the chaos. Wildman continually exposed himself to enemy fire to reorganize his men. He then volunteered to make a reconnaissance to locate the enemy positions. Returning to his platoon, he directed the counterattack. Wildman was fatally wounded by an exploding mortar during the attack. He was posthumously awarded the Silver Star, the nation's third highest military honor. He was 29 years old when he died. Wildman was buried in the 4th Marine Division Cemetery on Iwo Jima. 3 years later, his remains were exhumed, and his parents buried him in the family plot in Worcester Cemetery in Danbury, Connecticut. I visited his grave to pay my respects and to tell him that each Memorial Day, Taft honored his service and sacrifice in a ceremony held in Lincoln Lobby. I cleaned his moss-covered gravestone and placed a U.S. flag and a Marine Corps flag at his grave. He rests in peace eternal beside his mother and father. Marine correspondent Sergeant Gilbert Bailey wrote about those who served on Iwo Jima. These men would be legendary characters if history could absorb them. Stories will never be written about most of them. There are too many, and what they did has come to be taken for granted. They called him the Kid. In another place and time, he may have been seated among you. 18-year-old Alphonse L Pelosi joined the Marine Corps after graduating from high school in 1943. He heard the Marines were the toughest, and he wanted to be a part of that. Following basic training at Parris Island, he was assigned to the 3rd Marine Division, 21st Regiment Weapons Company, where he became a field radio operator. Shipped overseas in 1944, he took part in combat night patrols on Guam. In February 1945, Pelosi, then 19 years old, headed for Iwo Jima. He came ashore on the 2nd day of battle. He was met by a killing barrage of heavy artillery, mortars, and machine gun fire. He remembers his sergeant yelling at him, "Kid, keep your head down before it gets blown off." Dead Marines crowded the beach. Pelosi said, "We had to get off the beach to survive. We advanced yard by yard, but you had to keep moving. I was only 120 pounds, and I carried a 48-pound radio on my left shoulder, a carbine rifle on my right shoulder, and grenades lined both my pockets." By the end of the 2nd day, they had secured their position near Motoyama Airfield No. 1. They had covered 600 yards that day. Each morning, the Marines would attack. Each night, they would be shelled. Pelosi recounted, "I don't think I slept on Iwo Jima, not with all the shells and mortars exploding. In the morning, you looked around to see who was dead and who was alive. On Iwo Jima, 1 out of 3 Marines would be killed or wounded." The photograph shows General Erskine Graves reviewing a map as he plans the counterattack to capture Mount Suribachi and raise the American flag. Private Pelosi is in the background, helmetless, with his back to the camera. Pelosi recalled, "At night, I prayed and prayed. They don't teach you how to die when you're 19 years old. So I made 1,000,000 promises on Iwo Jima." On the 10th day of battle, a mortar shell exploded near Pelosi. His best friend, standing nearby, was decapitated. Pelosi suffered serious wounds, a concussion, amnesia. He spent the next 6 months in military hospitals recovering from his injuries. He would later receive the Purple Heart. His war was over. He returned home, attended college, got married, raised 2 sons, and worked in the court system for 40 years. He volunteered with the Boys Clubs of America and the St. Vincent de Paul Society for the Homeless. Pelosi said, "I'm just trying to repay for all the good years. I'm still trying to keep those promises I made on Iwo Jima." He forgave the Japanese soldiers he fought against. They didn't want to be there either. They had parents, and they had wives, and they had children. It's war. Once it started, nobody could pick and choose. Now 88 years old, Pelosi said, "There can't be many of us left. No one knows what Iwo Jima was. None of the kids do. Everybody forgets. I would too if I were that age." Al, we can never properly thank you for your service and sacrifice, but we will never forget, because honor is the cornerstone of Taft. Please join me as we all honor Private First Class, United States Marine Corps, Alphonse L Pelosi. Kid, come on up to the stage.